And we're live. And with me, I have Nick Carroll and Blackjack. Hey guys.
Hello.
Hello.
Would you would you guys like to talk about your channels and what starts with Blackjack? Want to talk about your channel and what you do?
Okay. Yeah, I do have a channel, a YouTube channel. It's just Blackjack. Um, I have one video that was a live stream I did with a friend I made on a German. Well, he's a German friend I have, and I met him on one of NC's after stream talk things. We just talk about shit. Oh, sorry. I don't know if I'm gonna try to censor myself. I'm sorry. Um,
It's cool.
yeah. So it's about 20 minutes of that because I don't. It's the only thing on there. I've been thinking about posting a video, but just been busy. Might do it sometime this weekend. I don't know. And then most of the stuff I do is on Twitter. I just post a bunch of random stuff. I retweet a couple people. Sometimes I make comments on shit or on stuff.
We're adults. We don't care.
Okay. I don't know.
Well, it's arguable that we're adults. Anyways, go on. Sorry.
That's true. Yeah, that's about it.
Nick, would you like to talk about your channel and what you talk about and what you do?
Yeah, so pretty much my channel is Nick Carroll. Basically, you can find it. I'm usually the first results to come up. And basically, for the last year and a half, I've started talking about different political events. I'm basically an American conservative. I've been a conservative for a few decades. I'm basically just a political layman, but you know, I've picked up a few things over the years, over the decades. And you know, anytime something interests me, I just make a video about it on my channel. Videos tend to be anywhere between 4 minutes and maybe 20 minutes long. Occasionally I'll have an extra long video. And I've recently started doing shows called The Nick Carroll Show, which is more of a long form kind of broadcast. And I tend to also put those out on SoundCloud. So I have a Nick Carroll SoundCloud channel as well as, of course, this YouTube channel. And basically, you know, that's pretty much about it for me. I started out as sort of a technology YouTube channel in like 2013. And before that, in 2006 or 2007, I did a handful of game video uploads back in the day before HD and game streaming and all that kind of stuff. And so sort of switched gears over the years. But that's basically it. I'm a little bit of a right-winger. I put out political videos. About half the people I follow in the YouTube community are liberals. The other half are roughly conservatives, and a wide variety of people. And that's pretty much what I do on my channel, is I talk about political stuff in the last year or so.
Okay, so we're talking about the Hillary Clinton versus Donald Trump debate, and I do think that Donald Trump made a good point earlier in the debate when they asked the question. Well, Lester asked the questions: "What are you going to do to create jobs in America?" And he says that when companies go to like Mexico and whatnot, that they should be taxed before coming in. I don't. It sounded good to me.
Yeah, it doesn't. It sounds good, but it doesn't really. The economics of it don't work. I'm a proponent of free trade, so I like nobody right now because basically everybody decided they hate free trade.
Yeah.
Sometimes
Everyone's a protectionist.
Everybody's a
Yeah.
protectionist. It makes me
Yeah.
sad. You know, I mean, you look at all the things that everybody's saying. Bernie did have a point about recent trade deals like TTIP. And but what's that?
TPP.
TPP, yeah.
And now it's turning into TISA, TISA, and I still don't know much about that, but yeah.
Yeah, there's a whole bunch of trade. A lot of most people don't know a lot of stuff with the trade. NAFTA was actually a really good deal, insofar as that they managed to sort of not they managed to sort of cut the corporate interests out, right? The corporate interests were sort of entirely behind just getting a free trade deal and not sort of getting special rules put into the agreement so that they could sort of hide in different places and whatnot and abuse legalities variously.
Yeah, and one of the reasons for having free trade essentially is to, how this works is basically you're going to hurt either person A or person B through this. If you have this sort of protectionist kind of scheme, you're going to protect certain jobs that'll stay in this country, they won't go to other countries. But the other side is our consumers will pay more for the items that are produced here typically if you rule it out entirely. So it's kind of a trade-off.
Well, what free trade? Yeah, like I said, everything's there. What was it? I don't know if this is Milton Friedman or Thomas Sowell, but
probably both.
Probably both. What was it? There are no solutions, only trade-offs.
Yeah,
that's true, and it's still true, and it's been true for all of history, and probably will be true for the rest of history. But back to the main thing with free trade is comparative advantage, right? It allows you to do what you're best at most efficiently compared to other countries. For example, this is just sort of a basic example, right? You know how China makes a whole bunch of cheap stuff, and I could get into a whole. I could probably make a video on the Chinese economy, but nobody would care because economics is boring. But basically, China makes a lot of cheap stuff, right? And so because America is not spending, or American companies are not spending money making cheap stuff, they can spend more money, or more capital is freed up to make things like airplanes or air conditioners or stuff like that, more complex goods essentially. So that's kind of how that's a basic example of comparative advantage, right? China is good at producing cheap stuff, while the United States is good at producing more expensive industrial goods or services.
And actually, the reason why we're forced to be really good at making the expensive stuff is because we have things like minimum wage and higher regulation, because that basically prevents a lot of millions of people in this country from making cheap stuff here.
It prevents cheap. Basically, it's about labor costs, right? If your labor costs are high, then people are less likely to want to make cheap stuff in your country because basically your labor costs are high. And with a lot of that cheap stuff, basically the highest or the biggest hurdle you have to clear is labor costs, because the machine's not that expensive long run. The material's not that expensive long run. The people, that's where you go hunting for the best deal. That's why China has been previously where a lot of just that's why you see those bendy rulers with "Made in China" on them.
Yeah,
or
Taiwan
little tin pot.
Yeah.
But cheap stuff that breaks easy, but easily it's cost 25 cents, so who cares?
Disposable. Yeah, I mean that's why we have a trade deficit, is because we're buying a lot of stuff from others, and trade deficits aren't necessarily a bad thing. They're just
I really wish that nobody had ever come up with a trade deficit, or it is kind of useful for but I wish nobody would use it because it's irrelevant, right?
Yeah.
For example,
Venezuela has a
trade surplus.
Yeah.
But that's just because nobody in Venezuela can afford to buy things.
Yeah.
Right? The fact that we have a trade deficit is just evidence that our consumer market is still the strongest in the world.
Yeah.
Now, this is going to get me off topic, so I'm just going to.
No, go for it. That's what this night's for, man. We're just chilling.
Okay. So the thing about consumer markets, right, is that they're predominantly dependent upon. Basically, your consumer market is when you go to the store and buy something, that's you participating in the consumer market.
Yep.
So one of the. I gotta go. There's a fire drill in my building, so I guess I'll see you guys later.
Yeah,
I'll
that's
just mute
cool.
myself and you guys can talk.
Yeah, come back if you can.
It's not an actual fire, but somebody is probably just smoking.
Okay,
Yeah. So
that's cool.
See you guys when I get.
Okay. So yeah.
Yeah. So one point that's I think Donald Trump made an excellent point in the debates when he's sort of in the debate where he says like Hillary makes all these mean negative ads, but when he looks to the polls, he's either tied with her or winning, even though she spends all those like millions of dollars of ads attacking him.
Yeah. Yeah, she spent a lot more than him. And while technically she hasn't spent $200 million on negative ads against him, it's mostly just been, it's probably been a few tens of millions of dollars in the last month or two where she's made some negative ads from him. But mostly she's been stockpiling a lot of money from various donors, a lot of donations from, from just average people, as well as, a lot of very, rich people. And she's just stockpiling for use between now and November 8th. And so you're going to see her do a lot more ads like that. And, Donald's basically been relying a little bit more on grassroots action, word of mouth, and advertising and stuff like that. But also he's been somewhat not hesitant, but he hasn't been gaining a lot of money until relatively recently, and he's now starting to gain a fair bit. He's been visiting a lot of donors and getting a lot of money, and some people are starting to break down, and some of the rich people are starting to break down and start to fund him. But mostly the types of ads that he's been doing have been the viral type. We're just going to post a 30-second deal on Instagram and then let it go viral, or I'll post something on Twitter and Facebook and let it go viral. So that's kind of how he's been doing it. Plus, he's been having more coverage than Clinton on a lot of news networks, simply because he makes more news. He's a lot more interesting, and most of the mainstream media hate him as a rule because he's now a Republican. And so that's kind of the dynamic that's playing here. So he may not have been factually 100% accurate when he made the claim on the debate, but that's the thing about Donald, is most of his claims may not be 100% accurate. Some will be 100% wrong, but he'll get the gist of a lot of things right. And honestly, his supporters are more interested in essentially striking back against, like Hillary or the quote unquote establishment, or the political class, or donors, or Wall Street, or whatever. And so, that's why Donald Trump has his appeal, not because he makes a lot of principled arguments with details and facts and all that kind of stuff. It's mostly, like I'd made a video recently where I basically said that Hillary Clinton, she can make an argument. She's good at basically prosecuting, making an argument, bringing up facts, and then making a persuasive argument against, like Donald, and he'll basically respond with "your mom," and that's his way of striking back. So it's two different looks at how they attack each other. And honestly, quite a lot of people get bored with Hillary blathering on for 2 or 3 minutes, and Donald Trump will say a handful of things, and they'll get it. So the takeaway is they will get more from a Donald Trump argument than her, simply because he doesn't get bogged down in a lot of specifics.
Yeah, like when watching the debates between like Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton, Donald Trump is a lot more interesting. Like,
Yeah.
Like Hillary Clinton know what she's talking about, but even if she knows what she's talking about, she was a lot more boring. Like, she puts me to sleep, and not only is she like really boring, but she's known for being a liar. So for me, it's almost like she just has liar written on her forehead, because all I could think of is, this woman's a liar. And
Yeah.
like the Haiti victims, where she's supposed to give like 6 million
Yeah.
Haiti victims,
Yeah.
but instead she gave them to like the warlords.
Yeah. Yeah. Basically, they made a big deal to the global initiative that, hey, we're going to give a lot of money, and someone recently did a look at her taxes, because, she made them public. And it's something along the lines of only 6% of her the money that she got as a part of the Global Foundation ever went to anything. The other 94% or whatever all went to costs and other quote unquote other expenses, and you couldn't track them down to any sort of donation anywhere. So that's the whole thing. I mean, the world has known for decades that the Clinton name basically means liar. It's Latin for liar, apparently. So basically everyone's like, yeah, it's hard to believe what she's saying. And because she doesn't have a really good personality, and when you can pretty much guarantee that when her lips are moving that she's lying, it's really hard to A, be interested in her because she's not charismatic, and B, it's hard to believe her because she lies so much. She lies so much that she'll lie about things she doesn't have to. Like, she apparently has some sort of illness and she's missing a bunch of speeches, and then she basically collapses or faints or freezes up and has to be carried or thrown into a van, by 3+ people, and then finally six hours later, her team comes up with, hey, I've got pneumonia. It's like, that's if indeed she does actually have pneumonia or some sort of sickness. There's no reason to cover it up, but it takes her collapsing or whatever, and then all this kind of thing happens. And more to your point about like interesting speeches, this is the one thing that Donald Trump is good at, particularly his off-the-cuff speeches where he just goes off notes and rambles here and there. He's a lot more magnetic in how he speaks, and I've watched dozens of his speeches since he announced in like, what is it, June of last year, dozens of them. And often you sort of get lost into the speech, and it's easy to follow what he's saying. He's using like 6th grade language, and he repeats himself, and he uses hand gestures, and he's very like charismatic. I don't want to say charismatic, but he's very like he's not very rigid in his speech, so it's easy to follow along. And before you know it, it's like 40 minutes into his speech, and he's saying thank you, God bless America, or whatever he's saying, and then walks off. So whereas Hillary, she can't even draw crowds. She's very dry and uninteresting when she speaks, and it gets to the point where it's like, I can see why nobody attends her events. There's nothing to watch.
Yeah, I've never really been interested in the debates. It's kind of like, this is why I had took an issue with the trigger warning sign, like trigger warning, like this may contain abuse and whatnot. Yeah. It's like, I've seen presidential debates back when I was like a child, and it just put me to sleep because of how dull and boring it is. It's like, how could I watch these debates as like 6 years old and not be triggered, because it's just so boring and puts me to sleep. But like with Donald Trump, even like when in the GOP debates, it was funny, it was interesting, it was hilarious. Like, Donald Trump talking about his hand size. It's like, when it comes to my hands, let me just say, there's no problem.
There's no problem, yeah. And a lot of the speeches that he gives are off the cuff, and they're more interesting. And he'll repeat some things from his previous speeches, like a lot of politicians do. But a lot of the new stuff he introduces with each one throws everyone off. And because they're actually interesting and different, whereas Hillary is your prototypical politician, extremely politically correct, saying no sort of interesting language except for attacks towards her opponent because it's legally okay to, not legally, like literally legally, but it's like within the political culture, fair game to basically say as mean and nasty things you want against your opponent. You just can't do it against anyone else. Whereas Trump, he'll just blast against anyone. He'll blast against other people in his party. He'll blast against media people. He'll blast against just about anyone. And his speeches are generally a lot more interesting. So that's the dynamic. And if you look at the ratings he got for the Republican speeches, they were like several times higher than any of the Democratic speeches, and several times higher than the previous primary debates in previous elections 4 or 8 years ago, simply because he's a much more dynamic character, much more interesting. Plus he has all the stories about him, outside of the political sphere that, quite frankly, just brings the people. And so that's why you ended up with such high rating, for just the televised, debates that occurred Monday. And then worldwide, there were a lot of streams, and who knows how many more tens of millions of people that watched it either live or after the fact within the last couple days afterwards. So yeah, it ended up being a decent debate. Like you, I thought he came on strong at first, and he sort of wilted. Like the way I described it in one of my recent videos was, he basically, for the first, it was basically a tale of three halves, 3.5 hours, a 90-minute, slightly more than 90-minute debate. And each 30-minute section was essentially a different topic. And for that first 30 minutes, he pretty much held his own. He came out strong. He was attacking her fairly aggressively. She had technically attacked him first with two attacks in her first comment. Then afterwards, he basically had a back and forth on her. And it honestly seemed like, at least in my opinion, that she might be breaking a little bit, or might be sort of like being a little flabbergasted. And then she basically was successfully able to lobby more like claims against him over and over. And at that point, it was apparent that Lester Holt, the moderator, was going to continue to ask him questions about his personal things he said, or like his income taxes or whatever. And so Trump ended up getting bogged down for that. So that middle half hour that was a good back and forth between Trump and Hillary, but you could kind of see the direction of things change then, and then it just kept getting worse. And by that third half hour, Trump really started to taper off, and at this point he was buried into defending himself, and it was basically Hillary Clinton and Lester Holt constantly bringing up things for him to defend himself. And it got to the point where she ended up finishing strong, even though if you look at the way she composed herself from the first minute she started speaking to the last minute she spoke, it's pretty darn consistent, pretty same energy level throughout, like she was running a marathon. But for Trump, it was like he was sprinting in the sense that he was starting out strong and then sort of, losing energy, and having to defend himself over and over and over. And so that was the interesting thing about the debate. It ended up being a 2-on-1, and the end result is you end up getting a lot more attacks towards Trump simply because of the 2-on-1 action, and he couldn't really keep up. And ultimately what the audience is going to see is a lot more attacks on Trump than Clinton. And that may be part of the reason why a lot of the online polls went for Trump after the debate, because maybe a lot of people could see, the moderator bias and how things were going.
Yeah. Trump stuff was interesting and funny. Like one of the parts that I laughed at, like that I just thought was hilarious, when Trump, he was doing all this yelling, all this screaming, and then he says, "I have a better temperament than Hillary Clinton," and then I bursted out, started laughing.
Yeah, pretty much everyone started laughing at that point, and I don't blame him, because I mean, there are things he can argue, like, hey, I'm a businessman, I create jobs. There's all these literally positive things that he could say, despite, both these candidates have a lot of negatives, both these candidates have a lot of positives within the relative spheres. But Trump would have been better advised to not say that he has better temperament than her. If anything, he should say, hey, there are areas where I've shown good temperament, and you might say that there's a weakness in not having a good temperament, and that's made up for other things, smart decisions and stuff like that. And he just didn't defend himself as well as he could have, and he made some statements like, I have better temperament than her and stuff like that. And that kind of stuff just eats away at his own credibility when he says stuff like that.
Actually, I think he did that on purpose, because it just had me laughing. And I do think that, again, Donald Trump, he's an entertainer. Like, he's been on TV for
decades.
A decade?
More than a decade. He was on The Apprentice for like more than, I don't know how many seasons they have, but I think it's like more than 10 seasons. I'll Google it real quick.
Because he's been on The Apprentice, then he had these celebrities. So he's an entertainer, and it's his duty to entertain people. And I don't know. I think that Sargon was talking about rules for radicals. I recently just downloaded Rules for Radicals on Amazon, and I haven't really had a chance to read it yet. But Sargon did say something along the lines that Donald Trump, not his Donald followers, have been incidentally following Rules for Radicals.
Yeah. So that the thing about Rules for Radicals. All right. So that's a book written by Saul Alinsky, a quote unquote community organizer and uh, basically a schmuck, but basically a very pro-communist kind of almost a mob guy, really, when it comes down to it, back in the 60s and 70s. And he wrote a book called Rules for Radicals. And there's a number of rules in terms of how do you the minority or the marginalized group rebel against the establishment or the power or the whatever and engage in essentially class warfare. And there are a number of rules you can follow to essentially beat the enemy by, for lack of a better phrase, lying, cheating, and stealing. Um, that's essentially the thing. You would basically work against your enemy by using their rules against them, not abiding by their rules, changing things up, attacking them, focusing on them to a great extent, basically making them lose their cool and all that kind of stuff. And, Bill Clinton has been in large part a leftist much of his life. He's very socially liberal, very economically liberal, and a businessman in New York. There's no way he's not going to be a liberal in pretty much every sense. So, Donald Trump is essentially a 1990s Bill Clinton style Democrat, and his opponent, Hillary Clinton, is essentially a 2010 plus Bill Clinton's or Hillary Clinton style progressive Democrat. And she's basically, whereas Bill was fairly adept at using those kind of rules against his opponents, Hillary Clinton is more of a true believer in that type of stuff than his husband was. And they're both mobsters of a sort in terms of how they deal with people, very hard, very harsh. But to be fair, Donald Trump is also in that same vein. But because he's a different personality, and he's probably legitimately a narcissist, and I don't mean that in a necessarily insulting way. I mean, like, technically he may very well be a narcissist, and it is what it is. But, by the same token, Hillary Clinton is also a sociopath in her own way, where she is like, she will literally do anything to get what she wants, literally anything. And she'll lie, and she's so used to lying that it's second nature, and she can't help it. So that's exactly the dynamic that we're looking at here. And while I don't think Trump is specifically like an Alinskyite in the way that the Clintons are, he's learned how to understand politics through that lens, maybe through a secondhand lens, like the source would be Saul Alinsky, and then the apprentices would be like Obama and the Clintons and other people in a lot of Democrat politicians that sort of buy into that whole ideology. And then Donald Trump is like on the outside of that because he's a capitalist, he's a businessman, and he has to basically make money and make a profit, and combine that with his narcissistic personality. And what you end up getting is Trump. And his unique take is what inspires a lot of people. He's a strong man. He doesn't back down. He doesn't give a fuck. And he will basically make some of the craziest attacks and maybe some of the dumbest attacks against people, and then won't bat an eye about it. And then, it really catches on with a lot of people. And as you're bringing up, a lot of these people are using the same tactics that the left does, but against the left. And that's why you're seeing such consternation from a lot of these liberals and progressives that are supporting Hillary or supporting Bernie or buy into this whole leftist ideology more than Donald Trump does, because their own tactics are essentially being used by them. And a lot of the people that support Trump will use those too, even not if they aren't directly aware of Rules for Radical. They basically see what works and they use it too.
Yeah, like, back to what you were saying earlier, Hillary Clinton does lie a lot. Like, she even lies about her own name.
Yeah.
She said that she is named Hillary out after a person who climbed on top Mount Everest, but she would have been 6 years. There's no way it could have been true. Or it's kind of like, people because of Clinton Cash and because of all the things that have come out against Hillary Clinton, so many people already know that she would say anything, absolutely anything to get to votes. And I think people are turned off by that. I think people are very turned off by a person who lies and panders anything at all to get to votes. Whereas Donald Trump comes across as more honest,
More believable.
yeah, more believable because, I'm pretty sure that you've already seen this before, but 95% of Americans trust Donald Trump over the media.
Yeah, and part of that is because the media has done such a spectacular job of being unbelievable. Like, just today, I'll just give you an example. The media, well, actually yesterday too, more recently, they've been talking about Donald Trump's allegations of a sex tape with that Machado lady, that former Miss America from like 20 years ago, and the thing is, she's a porn star. She has made sex videos. She was on Big Brother and had sex on television on Big Brother. It was like Big Brother Venezuela or whatever the hell it was. And so it's like somehow the New York Times, Reuters, the AP, and a bunch of news organizations are making claims of allegations of a sex tape by Donald Trump. She was a porn star. She did a lot of things for money, and a lot of other things that I won't mention, that she's not an innocent woman, and that's coming out in the last few days. So, Donald Trump basically smacking her around because he doesn't like her, and because he doesn't like essentially being betrayed by her. Like if they had a conversation in private where he called her, what was the claim? Like Miss Piggy and Miss Secretary or something. I forget what it was. Even if that did happen, that was, something they were dealing with back then. And she was gaining weight after she lost her, after she won Miss Universe. And then she was under contract to essentially remain beautiful and essentially remain in a certain weight range after winning. And she rapidly started to gain weight. And there's a video that came out with Donald Trump basically supporting her and saying, hey, look, everyone likes to eat. I like to eat. She likes to eat. You just got to exercise more. And, making other sort of comments like that. So back in the day, he was basically supporting her out in the public, even if in private he wasn't as supportive. And then 20 years later, magically now after a debate, or her name is mentioned in a debate and she's ready to go right after her and go on to media, so obviously this kind of thing has been in the works. So naturally Donald Trump is going to be like, where's this coming from? This is out of the blue. And so he's basically attacking her because of that. But regarding Clinton, she, you're right. She has decades of scandals. Everyone knows all about her husband and all the women he slept with, and the allegations of women that were raped by him, multiple women from the 60s, 70s, and 80s. I mean, the original Troopergate scandal, the one that emerged out of the 1980s and early 90s when Bill Clinton was the governor of Arkansas, that Troopergate scandal basically emanated from Bill Clinton had, he was the governor of Arkansas, and he would have different events and different people would come to the mansion or whatever, or he would go to different events where there'd be, pretty ladies and stuff like that, cheerleaders and secretaries and stuff like that. And what he would do is he would have his security guards, his Secret Service, I forget what they were called in Arkansas, but they're basically the bodyguards of the governor. And they would basically invite these women to come hang out with Bill Clinton after the event, and they would drive these women up to him. And basically he would maybe have sex with some, maybe rape one or two, that kind of thing. And the cops got wind of that because they had to drive the women back home. And the two officers felt really guilty, so they basically came clean about that. They came out to like certain journalists, and then of course the mainstream media, because they're all leftist smucks, they basically supported, pretty much any Democrat in power, and they basically went to bat. And the Clintons basically threatened these women and threatened the troopers, and the troopers ended up, I think one or both of them lost their jobs. They lost their reputation, credibility as officers because of the whole thing, and it really went downhill. And that was just in like the late 80s, early 90s. That was the original Troopergate scandal. And then on and on. And then the Jennifer Flowers scandal came out, and the Monica Lewinsky thing came out, and the Juanita Broderick, and just dozens of women eventually came out basically saying, hey, I had sex with this guy, or this guy tried to come on to me, or maybe he raped me, all that kind of stuff. And so, yeah, Hillary Clinton covered for him and threatened some of these women and called them bimbos and did all this really nasty, reprehensible stuff that for some reason the feminists would overlook for decades. And so, yeah, a lot of people, they listen to Hillary Clinton speak and they're like, yeah, I don't believe this woman. Yeah, this woman has no credibility. Yeah, I can't believe this woman's in power. And even Democrats, a lot of Democrats are like, man, this woman's evil. I can't believe we have to vote for her. So anyways.
Yeah, and I mean, I do think that the younger Democrats are a lot more. That's because many young Democrats they voted for Bernie Sanders, and it's kind of like WikiLeaks came out, and they conspired against Bernie Sanders. I mean, they were like sending things to like he's crazy or like he's an atheist. So they were trying to spread all these terrible things.
Yeah.
About Bernie Sanders, and they were even like, at least in we could see emails of them talking shit about Bernie Sanders supporters and talking about how like Hillary Clinton has to pull in the young Bernie Sanders supporters, then go back to center, like when she goes to like Iowa or whatever, and it's kind of like it gets like really Machiavellian, and it's kind of like, man, like these people are just lying, corrupt. Like it makes young Democrats or like progressives and liberals feel really guilty and dirty. That's why they're leaning for Jill Stein. And when it comes to Jill Stein, it's kind of like they're divided because in one hand, they feel like they're throwing a vote away. It's kind of like, well, if I vote for Jill Stein, I would be throwing votes away. So I may as well vote for Hillary. Donald Trump is racist and sexist and misogynistic. But on the other hand, they want to vote for Jill Stein because it's kind of like she is a person that many progressives are aligned with. Like they feel like more compatible, more aligned with Jill Stein because she not only does she hold true to progressive values, she's more true and more genuine in these progressive values.
Yeah. Well also
by pushing progressivism, it could eventually backfire in the Democratic Party when the Green Party is more legitimate when it comes to being progressive.
Yeah, well, the thing is, right now we're really in an election where there's four Democrats. Donald Trump is a 1990s Bill Clinton Democrat. Hillary Clinton is, as I said, a 2000s progressive Democrat, Hillary Clinton style, and Jill Stein is her own style of Democrat, and then Gary Johnson is sort of a weird libertarian socialist style Democrat, which is really relatively rare in the U.S. So you're having a lot of the people on the left essentially splinter between these four groups. There's a large Democrat for Trump in contingent that have crossed over because they got sick of Hillary scandals, and they see her as basically going too far to the left and too authoritarian and too much like a neocon, and essentially teaming up with all the same pro-war neocons that backed George W. Bush, in the early 2000s. And so a lot of the people are like, no, we don't like that. So Harlan Hill and a few others have kind of, left the Democrat Party. What's those two black ladies? Like, it's like, I want to say Sugar and Spice, but it's like Diamond and Silk or something. They were former Democrats that voted for Obama twice. They're now voting for Trump. There's been a lot of other Democrats that Hillary's just too far gone. She went too far to the left, and she's too authoritative, and she's not. That's the thing. There's a large patriotic contingent in this country, and quite frankly, Hillary and a lot of the other leftists just aren't very pro-America. They're always pointing out the problems with America. They're always siding with Black Lives Matter over the cops. They're siding with immigrants over workers that are here in this country and citizens. All these sort of things. So then you have Jill Stein. She doesn't really have a record of scandals that Hillary Clinton does. So that's her appeal, even though she's still at something like 2 or 3% in terms of popularity. Then Gary Johnson, he's sort of a weird one in the libertarian. He's like almost an anti-libertarian at this point in terms of all the messaging he gives. It's like I don't know, but so Donald Trump has been able to sort of attract a lot of people that these other groups aren't really getting the support of. So interesting thing about the Bernie supporters is a lot of them are too young to know firsthand of a lot of the Hillary Clinton and Bill Clinton scandals from the 60s, 70s, and 80s. So they're just completely in the dark. And honestly, they're never going to be told because the mainstream media just isn't going to bring them up, except to say, if someone does bring them up, they'll just say, yeah, those are all discounted. And then, you know, they never mention it again. But this millennial group, it now finally, because of the DNC leaks and WikiLeaks and whatever other forces, they're finally aware of, yeah, Hillary Clinton really is corrupt. And yes, she did conspire with the DNC and the media to essentially block Bernie from having a legitimate chance, you know, in the Democrat primary, you know. And you get actors like Debbie Wasserman Schultz basically working, you know, to help, you know, one candidate over the other, despite her role as the DNC chairman. And she's basically obligated not to play favorites. And then when it's revealed through one of these email leaks that she actually did cheat, you know, she has to step down from the DNC chair, but Hillary Clinton rewards her with a platform, a member, like a chair status on her platform team or her campaign team. That's what it was. And so now finally, I know people on the left wing finally that understand that Clinton is dirty and corrupt. I mean, just to put this in context for people that you know, are new to the stream or new to me or anything like that. But I used to debate in the late 1990s or mid to late 1990s through the early to mid 2000s. And I debated with dozens of liberals, probably hundreds, I don't know how many, countless liberals, and some self-identified progressives over about a decade. And these people would never admit to wrongdoing by anyone with the name Clinton, you know. And anyways, it was just frustrating. And now finally I see people on the left basically cursing Clinton because of her actions. And you know, I think it's kind of cool that finally some people on the left are willing to see that these people are not all they're cracked up to be.
Yeah, like, are you familiar with Demexits?
No, what's that?
Democratic exits.
Oh yes, yeah, that movement. Yeah, there's a lot of people that are like, I'm not really a fan. Like I've got a personal friend that he moved back into town a few months ago, and we started catching up. And I basically told him, he had mentioned something to me just off the cuff about Hillary Clinton. You know, like, I don't understand why people have a problem with her now. And I told him, you know, she's evil, right? And he just started laughing, like he just couldn't comprehend, where would I come from calling her evil? She seems like a nice lady. And the thing is, he's an ex-journalist. He used to cover the news for a small town newspaper that him and I lived in a while back, a decade or more ago, maybe almost a couple of decades ago. And he knew that a lot of people in like journalists and working for newspapers like he was and for TV stations were left wing, but he didn't really understand why that was an issue. And so over the last few months, I've been explaining things about Hillary Clinton and showing him what she's been doing and, you know, how he's been treating Bernie and all that kind of stuff. And then he finally got it. He finally got why Hillary Clinton was evil. And then I took him to see Hillary's America, like maybe a month or two when that movie came out. And I was just going to go myself, but I told him, hey, I'm going to go see this movie. And he's like, hey, I'll go with you. I was like, okay. So he went, saw it, and he finally got to see the right-wing side of the story of Hillary Clinton, not more left-wing propaganda that covers up everything she's ever done. And afterwards, he's like, man, I kind of understand what's going on, essentially is what he told me. And then over the last month or two, he's basically decided, I'm done with the Democrat Party, especially for what they did to the Native American Indians and all the civil rights issues they caused up through the 60s and 70s. And, you know, creating the KKK and all this kind of stuff. So like, screw it. So he's now voting Green Party because of Hillary.
Yeah. When it comes to me, I used to be a leftist, you know, like I was I grew up in a Democratic family, like as you could imagine.
Yeah.
My whole entire family has been heavy Democrat. I voted for Obama twice, and it's kind of a lot like the left has gone too far left and going too far left for a while. Like I found like teal deer first, and then I found vernaculist and sargon, and then it's just made me weird that it's like the left, it's just too far left. It's become radicalized, and
Yeah.
it's kind of like I'm now listening to more conservatives. Like I've listened to like Ben Shapiro, I've listened to Steven Crowder. I just
Yeah.
listened to different people from the rights, and I've listened to like Marco Rubio and the GOP debate, and I mean, listening to the GOP debate, and isn't there a guy called like Larry Elder? I think his
Yes,
name.
that dude is bad. Larry Elder, that's the man right there. That guy, he's got like all the stats. It's like at a drop of a hat, he'll just blow out. Hey, here's, you know, 10 bits of information you had no idea about, and now that you know it, your life has now changed. Thank you. Have a good one. Mic drop. And then he walks away. So Larry Elder's pretty bad. Pretty awesome.
Yeah, like I've just learned like so much like listening to conservatives that it makes me like change my mind, because like listening to the GOP debates, I feel like I have a lot more in common with conservatives than
Yeah.
I ever had with the left. It's like I never really realized how compatible my are to ones on like the right. Like it's like listening to like Marco Rubio, listening to like Ron Paul and Ted Cruz. I realized that I have like more in common with Republicans than I do Democrats, because I would watch the Republican national convention, well, the Republican GOP debates, and it would be like, wow, like these are good questions, these are good answers. So when I would watch the Democratic debates, it was like sexism, misogyny, or like Black Lives Matter, or it's kind of like Bernie Sanders saying like only Black people are poor, or like I don't know, like homeless white people don't exist, or have it as bad as Black people, or something stupid like that. Or it's kind of like the left saying, well, Bernie Sanders, aren't you being sexist Hillary Clinton because you interrupted her while she's talking, even though she interrupted him? So
Yeah.
it's like Hillary Clinton actually interrupted him, then he is trying to like, get back to talking, but he's called sexist for interrupting her, even though she actually interrupted him.
Yeah. He was once called sexist simply for, he was asked about, he's basically indirectly called a sexist, but some female reporter said, don't you feel bad that you're preventing or that you're working against Hillary Clinton becoming the first woman president? And, whatever the question was, I forget because it was almost a year ago. But that's basically how the media was looking at it, particularly the media that's like in the tank for Hillary Clinton, is because, they want her so badly that they'll even attack other Democrats or even other independents, whichever, because Bernie was a little bit of both. But other leftists in order to get her to win. And they'll use the same tactics against those that they will against everyone else. So here's the thing I wanted to bring up. So you're essentially being red-pilled, for lack of a better phrase. You're basically seeing the other side and seeing that we're not all a bunch of bad guys. So the experience that I've had as an American conservative for a decade is that I talk with people, particularly online, where I'm like bringing up a point, and essentially I'm called, racist, sexist, homophobe, Islamophobe, or whatever the case may be. It's always something like that. And it's based on me not agreeing with affirmative action, or me, wanting to treat everyone equally based on their race and gender, not caring about that stuff, and not treating one better than the other because of oppression or, that kind of stuff. So I've known about that stuff, for decades, and, seeing others like Sargon of Akkad and others basically have those charges leveled against them kind of proves a point that I made a long time ago, that when people argue against a slippery slope, they say, hey, you're making an argument that's a slippery slope, therefore it's an invalid argument. The thing is, when you're looking at a political spectrum like left and right on economics, for example, you can pretty much predict what a right-winger will say, what a left-winger will say. You can pretty much predict along that spectrum, you want more or less economic control by the government. You want a government that forces the economy to do its will and is very anti-business. And the worse and worse it gets, the more left-wing it goes, for example. So I've been told, hey, you're making a slippery slope argument. We're not arguing for X, Y, Z. We're arguing for A, B, C. The thing is, A, B, and C are letters along a continuum or a spectrum. And on the other end of that spectrum is X, Y, Z. So you can predict what the other letters are after A, B, and C. So for me, being a right-winger for forever at this point, and being told I'm evil for all these reasons, I hate gays, I hate trans people, I hate Muslims, I hate black people, I hate women, or whatever it is, right? Because I'm a white guy, and you can see that the further left these people go, other people that are on the left with them, if those people don't move with them towards, E, F, and G, Q, R, and S, those people that end up at those further letters will now look at the other left wingers closer towards the right and then blame those people as right wingers. That's how Sargon of Akkad ends up being a right winger, according to these people, because he doesn't go too far to the left like those people are. So it is kind of funny to see that dynamic play out.
Mm-hmm. I'm back.
Yeah, welcome back. When it comes to the left, you're right. And you're right. I have taken the red pill, but for me, it's kind of like the left has went to far left. It's kind of like, this is sexist, this is racist, this is misogynist. I feel like I didn't really leave the left. The left left me because it became too radicalized.
Yeah.
Sort of like, you've read those articles with me on my channel and know that math is racist, and like climate change is racist, and it gets like so ridiculous and so absurd, like accusations of internalized racism or internalized white supremacy, or I've been called a white supremacist.
Yeah.
Really? I'm a white supremacist, but then it makes me like listen to like people and right, like, and when I'm like listening to like Ben Shapiro, and he talks about the Democratic Party and how they're like the party of the KKK, and how they were the party that was supporting of slavery, and how the Democratic Party, like even in the 1930s, wanted to take cops communities, it's like, and I'm like surprised. I'm like, what, really? Like, how come I didn't learn this in school? Like, how come I didn't know this? Like, I can't believe that I am now learning that the Democratic Party, even in the 1930s and 20s, were like trying to like get cops out of Black communities. And it's kind of like, wow, like this is like really, really creepy. And it's kind of like, oh well, the Republican Party, like they were actually trying to help the Black and there, like Abraham Lincoln is a Republican and he freed the slaves. And it's kind of like, wow, it's like learning about this and that is like a real eye opener. And it's like, wow. And it's like the Democratic Party like really is like crooked and shady and Machiavellian. Or even like when you look at the media, like Saturday Night Live is very, very left-leaning. And before I paid attention to it, even though like I noticed like even back then, like they were like saying like John McCain racist, or it's kind of like something in their life. They've been calling the right people people on the right like racist for a long time, and I never thought anything of it. But now it's kind of like, now it's like, what? Like, the left really would call anybody a racist,
Yes. Yeah. So the way it works is they basically control the narrative. Like if there weren't right-wing outlets like Fox News or the Drudge Report or Breitbart or National Review or other places like that, or the Daily Wire or whatever, relatively small number of right-wing outlets compared to left-wing outlets, basically they would have 100% control of the narrative. And that's part of the goal of the left, is to control that narrative so that they can make all these claims and not give the other side the opportunity to defend themselves. That's why when you look on CNN, it'll often be something like 5-1, 6-1, 7-1 in terms of pro Hillary to anti-Trump or whatever. Or if they have some conservatives on, half of the conservatives will be anti-Trump, like never Trump people or whatever, and the other half will be Trump people. So you end up getting, and that's how they control the narrative. They control the amount of time that people get on air to defend stuff. They lob a lot of complaints against these people, and they get it to where the handful of people that appear on their show, no opportunity to reply to all the points. And they basically can create this condition where it's impossible for you or anyone else to get to the other side. So the Republican Party is essentially the party of individual rights, and there are social conservatives, yes, and that's one of the attributes, but there's a lot of social liberals and social moderates as well. But the whole thing about the Republican and the conservative side of the spectrum here in America, at least, is essentially, individual liberty, inalienable rights, economic freedom, all that kind of stuff. Typically less government, more freedom to start your own business, less taxes, less regulations, more of your ability to do whatever. It's basically freedom, right? And the other end of that spectrum, the Democrat Party, is essentially more of fairness, government control, regulations, a lot of control, a lot of protectionism, a lot of nationalism, not nationalism. Well, in the last few decades, it's been more like internationalism or globalism, but a lot of, like not very free trade. And so it's been this sort of polarization of the two parties, whereas say maybe 100 years ago, there were progressives in both parties, there were individualists in both parties, and there's a little bit more of a hodgepodge. We've sort of become more polarized and represent different ends of the spectrum. The thing is, for this country has typically been a little bit more right-wing than most other countries in the world, simply because of our success being a capitalist, free market, individual liberty supporting country, that because of competition, a lot of other factors that helped us that other countries didn't have, we've been able to be successful, other countries can't. But there's that spectrum. There's the letter A and there's the letter Z. We'll just pretend A is right wing and Z is left wing, just for the sake of it here. There's a lot more room for the left to go to reach that Z than there is for the right to reach that A. And so our country has been going more left wing towards that Z letter, has been going more left wing in the last few decades. And so you're seeing that march through time. That slippery slope isn't a slippery slope. It's a legitimate slope that exists politically. So that's what we're seeing. So one of the key differences between conservatism and liberalism is some of it is attitude based. Like conservatism, it tends to advance slower. It's more procedural, more, it tends to embrace, traditions and stuff like that. But it's not purely that. And liberalism has been more aggressive and assertive in terms of branching out and trying more things and different things, like one liberal may have a different set of liberal policies than another liberal, and that both of them will be anti-traditionalist or anti-conservative or anti-classical. And so other different approaches. So, those are the sort of the dynamics there. But one of the key aspects about conservatism that a lot of people don't understand is the aspect of throwing out the bad and keeping the good. Like we see what works, like the family unit works. it's hard to argue against the family unit. You can say, oh, there's abuse in the families. There can be a patriarchy where a male dominates a female, and a female can be in a submissive role or whatever. But we argue a lot for essentially voluntary action, freedom, individual freedom within the conservative movement. So a man and a woman can get married and have a mutually beneficial relationship. They can be different. A man can have a manly role, a woman can have a womanly role, and it's not necessarily a bad thing. We don't believe biologically that men and women are exactly identical in every aspect. And so that's how conservatism differs from liberalism. So what we're seeing is liberal A may take a look at, no, men and women are exactly equal. There's absolutely no difference between them whatsoever. And so there shouldn't be a man and a woman. They should have different pronouns. They can choose their own pronouns and all this and that. And then liberal B might be, no, men and women are not equal, and women have been repressed by patriarchal norms for billions of years or whatever. And so you must treat them better than men. And there are differences between men and women. So you can see these two different liberal stances against a traditional conservative stance. And so these two people will essentially both argue against conservatives and this sort of traditional belief, but they'll have their own unique and different take on liberalism. And so that's what we've had to combat. And the thing is, for people like you and many others like you, you'll never hear our side by us, because you'll hear all the different liberal sides, and they'll basically control the narrative. And so you'll end up basically remaining in the dark, because if you just ignore Fox News like everyone else, then you get to watch CNN and MSNBC and ABC and CBS and NBC, etc. So.
Yeah, because I thought that CNN was the most trustworthy news sites of them all. But when it comes to CNN, I've also noticed, like, even when back with Obama versus McCain, I noticed that CNN would cut people off while they're in the middle of talking.
Just to check, can you guys hear a bell?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. I'm gonna see if I can't find a place where I can talk, or I might just leave. I might have to do that.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'll probably just leave, because this is just getting nuts. So bye, guys.
Okay, bye. Hey, thanks for joining.
Thanks.
Yeah, sorry I couldn't contribute more, but
No, that's cool. Life happens.
yeah. So bye.
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 Yeah, like CNN, it really does like cut people off when they're in the middle of talking, or even back when it comes to Obama versus McCain, it was kind of implied, even in CNN. I don't think it was directly stated, but I do think it was implied that if people don't vote for Obama, then they're racist.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, there was no way the Republicans could win that, no matter who we put up, because at that time, that progressive narrative of, oh, finally we're going to have a black president, and if you vote against him, you're a racist. And, it was the same thing. If it was Hillary, it would be, well, if you don't vote for her, you're sexist. So it would have been the same thing with her. But at that time, it would have been impossible for someone from the right to win unless they had a different principled argument, and they were good at making arguments. One of the things I like about Ben Shapiro, for example, is he's really good at making arguments that really shut down the arguments of the left. And he doesn't do it necessarily by attacking them. He does it by attacking their arguments.
Yeah, I don't think that the left would respond too well if you attack them, but if you attack their arguments, I think that some would listen, because I do think that some would be open to having their arguments challenged.
You pretty much have to, and you have to do it from a principled stance. You see, the whole thing about many on the left, and I try to be careful about saying the left, like not everyone from the left operates this way. I'm usually, when I talk about the left operating this way, I'm talking about the politicos, the polls, the pundits, the hosts on these liberal shows, the liberal editors in these liberal newspapers, the people like Bill Maher and all these left-wing comedians. Those are the people I tend to throw in this crowd. But they basically tend to throw all the same complaints against us, and they argue, oh, you conservatives, you're always moralizing, or you're always putting people down for not being either Christian or straight or believing in traditional marriage or any of those kind of things, and therefore you're evil because you're just trying to prevent people from doing what they want. We're the liberals. We're the ones that give people freedom, and government is what confers dignity to marriage and makes everything better for us, and you guys are just haters and stuff like that. And so they push all these narratives and these insults, and it gets to the point where, and the thing is, the left doesn't get it. People get sick of being told that they're racist and sexist and all these other ists. They get tired of it. And half the population of this country are still relatively right-wing, even if the other half are relatively left-wing. We may now be a center-left nation roughly, but we're not that far to the left from the center on average. And when you get tens of millions of people basically being told what they believe in is evil and they're racist and they hate people and whatever, these people get tired of it. And ultimately, that's how someone like Trump shows up and gets a lot of support, because he's a guy that just smacks them down. He attacks the media, which is at a 6% approval rating. He attacks the politicians and the establishment, which have a very low rating. He attacks people in Congress, left and right, and those people have such a low positivity score or whatever for people. A lot of people don't like them. So that's why Trump's popular. And a lot of people, they believe him, even if he does have a track record of saying things that are untrue or lying, and he has his own set of scandals and all that kind of stuff. A lot of people, they look at what he says and it rings true to them and they believe it. They believe what he's saying. He is believable to them. So they back him and they vote him. And they have this anger, this reactionary anger to being told all these negative things about them. And that's why you end up getting this harsh movement, essentially. Some alt-right people, some nationalists, some protectionist people, but there's also a high level of patriotism that's always been on the right that is very supportive of Trump, because every speech he talks about making America great again, his hat, make America great again. What does Hillary Clinton want to do about America? Well, she doesn't really say anything about pro-America. When cops get shot, she doesn't mention their names. When a black thug gets shot and then there's a riot, she mentions their names. So you see this sort of dynamic play out. And when people like you see this, it sort of opens your eyes. And,
I do think that even the left is getting tired of the left, because the is being turned against other people on the left for disagreeing. Like, even now, people in the left are starting to be called like racist, sexist, misogynist. Like, well, here's what I mean. Sargon of Akkad, he's actually like left libertarian, but he's called a right-winger, a conservative, and he's called like racist, sexist, misogynist. Or me, I was on the left, but even when I was on the left, I've been getting called like white supremacist, misogynist. I've been called like, well, you must be a man behind the screen, you're just pretending to be a woman. And it's kind of like the left has turned its arguments to other people on the left, and now that's where you see this red pill moment. It's because when the left turns its arguments from to the right, where it goes from, well, if you're a racist, like Republicans, they're racist. When there's targeting Republicans, it's easy to become brainwashed when you hear it enough time, because many people like listen to the media, many people listen to it, they pay attention, and it's kind of like when you hear that the Republican Party is racist enough times, you become brainwashed into believing it's true. But then when they start telling you, well, you don't, so you're racist. Well, you made this joke, okay, I was in a forum and there's this woman who was being like a total bitch. So I said, you must have your period on. And I've been called a misogynist over a joke, it's like, come on, it's like, I'm a woman myself, but I'm a misogynist. And when the argument turns against anybody who disagrees, it makes people in the left mad, because wants to be called a racist. Nobody wants to be called a misogynist. So it makes people on the left start to listen and pay attention to people on the right. And then, it's kind of a lot like when when people on the right start bitching and complaining about, like, we're tired of being called it racist, we're tired of being called sexist, misogynist, it's kind of like, I'm listening, like, I'm tired of being called racist, I'm tired of being called sexist, I'm tired of being called misogynist. I mean, it's like, I'm black myself. How could I be anti-black? I am a woman myself. How could I be misogynist? It makes me listen to the right, and the right is making a lot more sense to me because the left has turned its attacks from the right to other people in the left for not being pure enough.
Yeah, I mean, really, a lot of people that are on the left that I used to debate against at this point, they're the new right, and they're just going to have to embrace that role. And unfortunately, we have a long way to go in terms of the political spectrum. So we're going to see a lot more people turn even more to the left and more to the left, and get to the point where God only knows what we're gonna be fighting against. But a lot of us on the right, we're basically trying to fight against that and try to fight towards basically individual liberty and smaller government, more free markets and stuff like that. That's pretty much where a lot of us, come from.
Yeah. Uh, Man, I've run out of things to say. So, I mean, do you have anything more you'd like to add, or?
I think that's good. I've had a long day. I've been at work all day. Just got home a little bit ago. But yeah, no, I'm glad we got a chance to talk a little bit. I think that ultimately, when it came down to the debates, I think Donald Trump did good at first. Hillary Clinton basically did good towards the end. A lot of people may have tuned out, before the thing ended, but I thought it was interesting overall. I think it's interesting that a lot of things have come out afterwards, after the debate, like some of these scandals that Trump's basically talking about now. But also we're seeing other things on the left. Clinton, she had to cancel a speech. I think it was yesterday, maybe it was Wednesday, for whatever reason. And then it came out that in the debate, like there was a shot of her from behind her where she was like tapping her hand or something, like some sort of either nervous tick or some sort of, I don't know. But a lot of people are really sort of looking at Hillary's health kind of scandal again, because she was doing something weird with her hand while I was on the podium. And then in the last day, there's been a scandal with the podium. Like her podium was outfitted with some stuff that Trump's podium wasn't, and it was lit up in certain parts. So if you do a search for, what is it, hashtag podium scandal or podium gate, you'll see some interesting things that was going on with her podium. And then there's another scandal that happened with her podium where there's basically some sort of a Clinton campaign person that basically, after the debate ended, and you see this all on national TV, everything I'm talking about is on the NBC live stream, but someone basically picked up a folder from the podium that she was at. Some guy picked it up and then handed it to Lester Holt, all on national television. You can see it in the background. And a lot of people are wondering, why is Hillary Clinton having someone hand Lester Holt a folder with paperwork in it or whatever? So there's been a lot of interesting stuff coming out in the last day or two when people have been looking over that debate footage, like the Zapruder film. So we may see some more stuff come out over the weekend, or maybe earlier next week over the debate. So that'd be something to keep in mind.
Yeah, because, I'm glad you brought it up because, I mean, I noticed that watching the debates, Senate didn't cough once. And it's like she's been hacking her lungs out this whole entire time. And she's been having people jump on stage, to like this black guy, this black tough-looking guy jumping on stage and trying to help bringing her back to normal. So yeah. I was kind of like, she seemed healthy during the debate, so I'm like wondering what was going on,
Yeah, maybe it's getting better. So a lot of people, at least that are buying into the whole Hillary health scandal or hashtag or whatever, their whole argument is that there's something latent or under the surface that Hillary is essentially combating it, and maybe has been combating for years, considering all the times that she's fallen and stuff like that. So there's tons of video footage of her basically having issues climbing downstairs, or there's a picture of her having issues climbing up a stair after she had fallen. And then, of course, she had fallen getting into that van, or froze up, or fainted, or whatever happened. A lot of people have been suspecting that maybe she has Parkinson's disease or all sorts of things. That in and of itself isn't interesting. The interesting part is basically the media's cover up of it. You know, their defense of her on Twitter, the defense of her on their all other television shows, downplaying what's going on, and for her to continue to exhibit signs like what was it, a week or two when that bombing occurred in New York. She was like very lethargic when she was talking to the reporters. She only talked briefly, and then she left. And then there was another time where just recently, like today or yesterday, she was getting off the stage, and she had to be escorted downstairs because she couldn't quite navigate it on her own. So there are a lot of signs pointing to Hillary Clinton being a little bit infirm, and the media is basically ignoring it. But if you look at footage that people are recording, either they're doing Periscope or they're live streaming in some capacity, or they're just recording it and uploading it later, you're seeing that things aren't going well for her. And it seems like, with this recent debate with Lester Holt essentially acting as a referee that's fighting with one of the fighters against the other fighter, so you have two boxers and one of them essentially is being helped by the referee. It's kind of an unfair thing. That was obvious in that debate. And then we're seeing signs that the podium had extra features for her, it was lighting up and powering down during the debate or after the debate. And so, I don't know, there's a lot of weird stuff going on. It'd be interesting to see how all this pans out.
Yeah, because it's like, it's kind of like she was dragged into a van. She's had those little miniature seizures, or she would laugh for a very prolonged time. There's this GIF with her and Bill Clinton where she makes this weird face and her eyes does this crazy movements, and Bill Clinton kind of laughed it off. You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, that was at the Democratic National Committee's convention from a couple months ago when she accepted her nomination. A bunch of balloons fell down and a bunch of sparks, and it looked like she flipped her lid. That was really weird.
Yeah, like person, and it's kind of like during the debates with Trump, she seemed more normal. And it's kind of like, there's no way she could have been faking it this whole entire time. There's no way she could have been joking, because it's unprecedented, and it's, so it's kind of like, what's going on that she seems to make this recovery during the podium? I mean, cover during the base. I've been wondering, like, what's going on, because there's no way she just was faking it this whole entire time. Yeah. So well, I don't know.
Yeah, she's probably still dealing with it, but it's probably something that comes and goes. If she just has Parkinson's disease or some other issue, then it's probably something she's just, able to deal with in short spurts. Like she goes up for some speeches, she's able to handle it by then. So we'll see as time goes on. If she still has legitimately an underlying issue, it'll come out sooner or later. It's just whether or not that'll come out by the time she's elected or by the time Trump wins and it comes out afterwards. So we'll just see how it goes.
Yeah, to me, her sickness makes Trump more electable, because I don't know what kind of crazy person wants a sick person as president. Not only that, but if you are sick, shouldn't you spend more time recovering? Because I'm pretty sure if Hillary Clinton dies in the office, there are going to be people in the left going, wow, look at this misogyny. Woman dies in the office. Isn't it true that she was sick this whole entire time? Isn't it misogynist, to let this happen? Like, she should have been at home and recovering. But no, it's so misogynist that she had to die in office. I'm pretty sure she dies in the office. Many people are going to cry misogyny. us covering up for her health in the first place.
Yeah,
When
well,
really, I would want her to um, quit and just focus in on getting better. You know.
yeah. So the whole mindset of Hillary is she'll die before she quits. So she will literally do anything and everything in order to make it through, even if she can't legitimately serve as president once she's elected. I think she just wants to get to the point where she's elected, she wins, and if something happens to her, people will be like, "Oh, she's the new JFK," or "She's the new whatever." And so if she dies in office, then she'll be, idolized by Democrats for decades or centuries beyond. So I think that's her goal, is to stick it through. And if something tragic happens, or she announces, "Hey, I've got cancer, or I've got Parkinson's disease, or I've got whatever," then she becomes basically immune to being attacked. So in other words, if you say, "Hey, your policy sucks. Oh, you're a sexist," or "Oh, you're ableist. She's disabled, and how dare you attack her? A woman that's handicapped. How cruel are you?"
So, I mean, Hillary, she's so far gone that she seems to be more of a liability. Like, again, the crazy face she made with Bill and the crazy eye movements, or the miniature seizure she had while standing up and making funny faces, or Blair White pointed out that she was in an interview where she was laughing for like to the point where it can make people feel uncomfortable, or
Yeah.
like, or her like sounding like a robot when she talks. I mean, she is reaching the point, or like having a difficult time walking on the stairs, or having to be dragged into a van. It's reaching the point where she's a liability at this point.
Yeah, and pretty much there's pretty much no way that she'll give up, and she's just going to keep hiding it. And ultimately, the Democrats, they'll be happy with her getting in, because if something bad happens to her and she can't take the reins, and Tim Kaine will basically take over, and that's good enough for them. They can do their agenda with or without Hillary Clinton. They just need her in the presidency, or a Democrat in the presidency, so they can do what they want that way. The interesting thing about this dynamic is, and this happens over time, is you'll end up getting, like, a Republican will take the presidency, and then what happens is 2 years later, Democrats take the Congress, or vice versa. And so this may happen here. If Hillary Clinton is elected, that will be a boon for Republicans in Congress, because, just to be honest, there's nothing that lionizes or congeals the Republican base like a Clinton in office. A Bill Clinton presidency brought the Republicans in, what was it, 94, the largest up to that point victory in a single congressional election. And they basically took the House and the Senate, if I remember correctly. And it was huge because Bill Clinton was in office, and with all the scandals that were coming out just in his first years as president. And so if Hillary Clinton were to become president, win this election in 2016, you can expect the next wave of senators and House members to essentially be a large number of Republicans. Like, it'll shift more in their favor. So, that's the upside of Trump losing, basically.
Yeah. Well, I don't really have anything. Do you have anything more you'd like to say, or?
No, that's pretty much it. Thank everyone for watching, and we'll catch y'all next time.
Yeah, goodbye, everyone.